Hi everyone! I am going to do a really quick, super easy watercolor landscape tutorial. I know there are a million tutorials out there to make a landscape with watercolor, but I'm going to do it pretty quick and pretty small, and it's mostly targeted towards my students who are at home distance learning. I love you guys. And here we go. So I have my paper taped off, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my background. I like to start from a farther away distance on my landscape, so starting at the top, working my way down towards the foreground. It goes background, middle ground, foreground, and when I do my sky, I like to get my paper wet, and then I'm just going to go ahead and with some sky colors-ish. Next, I am going to think about my middle ground. The middle ground is everything that's usually about in the middle of your painting surface or your paper. These things don't have a ton of detail. However, you will still be able to see them a little bit better than your background. So I decided I wanted to do a landscape with some trees, maybe even some water. But I also wanted to include maybe like a mountain in my far background. And when things are that far away, you're not going to see a lot of detail. So I'm just adding it using a little bit of gray. If you don't have gray, go ahead and just like water down your black paint. It doesn't need to have a lot of detail because when things are that far away, you actually don't see the detail. Now this area right here is going to be some water. So I want to be able to see the opposite side of my body of water. I'm thinking it's going to be more of a lake or a pond. Now as I get farther down my paper, I'm coming to the foreground, so these areas should be darker or more vibrant colors. Also, the objects in this area should have a lot more detail. And I'm going to add more detail as I go when some of these layers dry. When I use, like, let's say I'm using green, I like to use as many different types of green as I can. So if you're working with a regular watercolor palette, you'll need to maybe mix in different amounts of yellow. And then when you want to clean off your green or whatever color it is, you'll just kind of wipe it with a wet paper towel. Now I love water droplets when they dry on your paper, so I'm just going to do some little blobs of water with my paint. I believe they're called water blooms or watercolor blooms, where you just take a lot of water with a little bit of paint and just dab your brush, and it's going to create a really cool kind of texture. It's a lot like what we saw in the coffee video, where it kind of pools and it pushes the pigment towards the outside edge. Now I'm gonna let this dry for a little bit, and I'm going to work on my water, but not too much, because if I touch these edges, it might bleed into my water, and I'm not ready for that to happen yet. So right now I just want to start with actually I'll add a little bit of detail on the opposite side of my body of water. And that could actually look like some trees that are off in the distance. And when they're this far away, you wouldn't actually see them very well. So it would just be kind of little outlines or dabs of texture that tell us that they're trees, but being they're this far away, you wouldn't actually see every leaf or branch. But you can somewhat tell that they are trees. And we will add a little bit more detail in just a little bit. Now I'm going to take a little bit of blue and a little bit of gray and start my water. Now, as you get closer to the bottom of your paper, the water and the ripples and all of the texture in the water will have more detail, but back towards the middle ground, it won't have nearly as much detail because it's farther away again. Now I'm staying away from my edges where the land is because that's not totally dry yet. I'm adding some more of those little watercolor or water droplet blooms, and they will look really nice when it's dry. And I know water isn't totally blue, but my sky is blue, so I kind of want to add a little bit of that, like a reflection. Maybe I'll even add a little bit of pink then. Now I'm gonna let this dry for a little bit. If your paper is starting to warp like mine, then you're not using watercolor paper, and neither am I. And that's okay, because whatever you have at home to make art with during this quarantine will just be fine. Now that my paper is dry, I'm going to take a smaller brush and add some detail. And I realize I kind of lost my mountain back there. I'm also overlapping my two hills in the background. Overlapping shows depth. Remember that your colors should get more vibrant, so they should be brighter colors as they get farther down, closer to you as the viewer. And as they go back towards the middle ground and the background, they should become duller. So imagine your colors getting more watered down in the background or mixed with gray. And then as they come forward, your colors should be more vibrant, meaning they could be darker or they could be more pigmented, so less water. Also, as you get closer to the bottom of your paper, or whatever is closest to you as the viewer, that could mean that there could be a tree that comes all the way up, but if it's that big and it covers up everything behind it, it should have a lot more detail. So I'm adding some detail now. So we know that in the middle ground and in the background, there would be grass back here, but because it's farther away, we wouldn't actually see that detail. Now I'm going to add some trees. I think I'm going to add a tree here, and then some trees maybe over here. I think because this tree will be a little bit closer, it's going to start lower on the paper, get a little bit higher. It's going to overlap everything that's behind it, and it should also have quite a bit of detail. Now I'm just kind of making like some little flicking up motions with my brush. You don't want the tree to be the branches to be like too limp. As you work your way down, they don't have to stem out from the center. They can even be branches that go across like that. Also, there should be a shadow underneath my tree. So I'm going to take some gray, water it down, and just add a shadow. I guess there we go. When it's dry, I can add more fine detail to my tree. Now I want to add maybe a smaller tree in the middle ground here. Because it's farther away from you as the viewer, it will appear to be smaller. So I'm actually going to use an even smaller brush. Now because it's farther away and I don't want too much detail, I'm going to make the branches less like this one in our foreground and a little bit just less detailed. If your paint palette has white in it, I suggest using some white in your water. It will just make it a little bit more smooth looking. Also, if you're a beginner painter and you're tempted to make those wavy lines, I say it's best to start just by making side to side brush strokes, and I think it will look a little bit more realistic. And then if you want to then add some texture, then just add texture by adding value, so either highlights or lowlights or shadows, I guess. I do want to add some reflections of these trees onto the water in my middle ground going towards my background, these little guys in the distance. But first I feel like there would be a bit of a shadow of these trees on that horizon line. So I'm just going to take some gray and define that horizon line a little bit more. Now, just so you know, I have not once used black in this painting because I like to, if I use black, I like to use it last, just for those fine details in my foreground. Now be careful if you are painting with blue next to orange and they mix together, it will make kind of a weird poopy color. Because they are directly opposite of each other on the color wheel, that means that they're complementary colors. And so when you mix two complementary colors, it should actually get you close to black. Now this is black, FYI. So I think that it's just about done. I might add a little in a little bit when it's completely dry. I should be waiting until it's completely dry to take the tape off, but I'm so excited. So I'm going to peel the tape off. I like to figure out what piece of tape is closest to the top. So I believe this bottom row was maybe the last one that I laid down. And when you peel off the tape, you don't want to peel it straight off. If you can see that at the bottom, you want to peel it at an angle. And I don't know the science behind it. I think it like doesn't put too much stress on the paper. But for some reason it just peels off so much nicer, and it leaves a cleaner edge, and it does not tear your paper. Sometimes you can reuse it a couple times and it'll still come off. Oh my gosh. I actually really love it. Alright, so I really hope that you liked that. It ended up being a lot longer than I anticipated. Here it is. Again, I love that clean edge where the tape is, but I'm also a sucker for a natural edge of paper. And my edges, I definitely didn't tear them very nicely, but who cares, right? This clean edge where the tape was, I feel like it adds just like a little bit of class to the painting. And so I don't notice that crooked, torn edge as much. Just kidding, I totally notice it. Anyways, I hope you guys really liked this. I love you all. I hope you're being safe. I hope you're healthy. And Nova is playing with paper right now. If you're one of my kiddos, I love you so much, and do your homework.